Hey guys, it's Courtney. I'm back here with another Coloring with Courtney video. Today we are going to be using the Oracle Octopus stamp set to create a all pretty much gray, but we'll say black and white card. So I am starting off with a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. This is a pretty large image, so I'm bringing out my Misty. I positioned my stamp and inked it up and realized that the stamp was still a little wet from cleaning it off previously. So I switched out my cardstock and re-stamped that onto a clean piece and didn't get the greatest impression because, like I said, the stamp was a little bit damp. So I did have to stamp this twice. And I do have the image cut out from a piece of Simon Says Stamp masking paper as well. And I did kind of struggle with this a bit because it is a intricate image, but I lined this up the best I could, but we can always fix any white outline that we have once we do our ink blending later on with a Copic marker that closely matches the background. So once I had that lined up, I'm going to go ahead and use one of the stencils from the Scenes of the Sea stencil. This is also by Trinity. Going to use the first set here, and I'm just going to tape this down with some Post-it note tape so it doesn't shift around when I do my ink blending. Get that lined up where I want it, stick that down. I'm working on a scrap piece of paper as well. Going to use one of the blending brushes and black soot. This is regular Distress ink because I know I'm going to be coloring over it. You can use the oxides. Just keep in mind that when you use your Copic markers or alcohol markers over Distress oxides, you're going to kind of get a muddy look. So it's definitely not going to be the same look as if you used regular Distress inks. So for the bottom portion of the stenciling here, I'm just going in pretty solid, as dark as I can get it. So this is pretty much black. Once I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and remove that stencil and line the other piece of the stencil right over it. So this is basically acting as a mask. I'm not really sticking this down too well other than just a few pieces of Post-it note tape again, but you can certainly use removable adhesive on the back of this, and that way it definitely won't shift around. But being my card is all the same color, or all the same color family at least, not too concerned. So going to use that black soot again, and I'm starting off at the top portion of the card panel and kind of working my way down. I wanted this to be pretty light, but I went in with a heavy hand, and I shouldn't have. So I was getting those streaky lines that you sometimes get with regular Distress inks. So I just kind of built up my color a little bit more, made this a little bit darker than maybe I intended on it, or I intended to, I should say, but concentrating the darkest area being towards the top of the card panel and then kind of fading off to a very light gray towards the bottom where it would meet the bottom portion of the ocean. Like I said, I did have to go over this several times. You can see I'm just dabbing on the ink and kind of dabbing that off on my scrap piece of paper and then bringing that to the card panel. I'm moving this around to kind of see the coverage that I'm getting. Being I'm working on this scrap piece of paper that is completely gray and black now, it's kind of hard to tell what the card panel will look like. So I did take that off and realized that top right corner didn't have enough ink, so just went in and added a little bit more to that area. Once I was happy with the coverage, I will go ahead and remove my mask, and I do use the tip of my scissors just to kind of get this started. This way it'll avoid tearing of the paper, being that Distress ink does stay wet a little bit longer than most inks. So once that was removed, I did have some areas that I did need to fix up here. Oh, first I stamped this little image inside his little crystal ball, or her crystal ball there. So the little white outlines that I have around where my mask was, I'm going to go in with a Copic marker that closely matches the background. I typically start with a lighter color, and if that's not light enough, I'll go one step darker. I'd rather go too light than too dark. So once it sits there a little bit, I can still see that little bit of an outline. So I went in with the C5 and fixed those areas up a little bit more, and the colors will blend a little bit and you won't even notice that there was a line or a white line there. So moving on to the coloring of the image itself, I am using the same markers for this entire card. I'm using all of my C markers, which are the C7, C5, C3, and C1, and I will bring in my black marker as well as my colorless blender in certain areas as well. But you'll be able to kind of tell using the same markers over and over, depending on how much you use of each of those colors, will completely change the look. So you can have very few markers, whether it be Copics or any other alcohol markers. You don't need a ton. You can get different looks with the same color combination just by changing the intensity. So I'm starting with the little octopus first here, and I'm going in directly with my darkest color just because I'm using the grays. The grays blend very well together, so I don't feel the need to saturate the paper first. So I'm just adding my darkest shadow areas where the darkest areas would be. So where one little, oh boy, I should have Googled this. Whatever these parts of the octopus are that are kind of coming out the body, wherever one overlaps another, that would create a shadow. So I'm making those the darkest areas. Also where this little crystal ball hangs over the rest of the octopus, that would also create a shadow. Where they're kind of twisted and turned, there would be some shadows there. And I'm also adding a little bit of shading to her face on either side, just because it makes it easy to concentrate on a center light source when there's so many shadows going on. Here I am on the C5, and I'm just basically extending these areas out a little bit further. I use the C7 pretty sparingly because I want her to be a little bit lighter than some of the other images. So I want her to still be gray. I don't want her to appear white, but I want her to be more of a lighter gray. So you can see that I'm using the C3 here now, but I'm still leaving a pretty generous highlight area for that C1 because that's basically going to be the main color of her. So I'm keeping a stronger highlight than I typically do. So last, going in with that C1, and I'm just going to go ahead and blend all of these areas out. Like I said, leaving that center highlight for her face and the top portion of all of these little arms or whatever, whatever they are for that C1 color. So next we're going to move on to her little hat there, and I want this to appear black. So I am going to bring in my black marker first, again going directly in with that darkest color, and I'm just going to add the shading on either side because we are keeping that center highlight. I'm going to blend that out a little bit with the C7, which is such a dark gray, it's very close to black anyway. Then going in with the C5 and just leaving a smaller highlight for that C3 because I want this to appear a lot darker. So you can see, yes, we did bring in the gray, but just by using more of that C7 and C5, we get a completely different look. So next we're going to move on to this little thing she's holding here, and the handle portion is going to be the same color combination as I used for her hat. Of course, I don't have enough room here to use all of the colors, so I just used a 3-color blend here, concentrating the highlight being in the center. For this little seashell, as well as her little eyelids there, going to use, again, same colors the entire time, just switching up the intensity of them so that I do get a completely different look. I wanted the seashell to appear more white, so I am leaving some white space on the top. For the crystal ball, just using the C3, C1, and to get rid of those harsh lines, I'm going to quickly go in with a colorless blender. You can use a lighter C marker, but I don't own one. And like I said before, I don't feel the need to own one because I can work with what I have. So I'm going to let that crystal ball dry a little bit before I color the inside of it, because I put that colorless blender down. If I were to go right in and color the rest of it, those colors are going to blend, and I don't want that to happen. So I want to make sure that my paper is completely dry. For this little area here, I am just kind of adding shading wherever I want. There's really no rhyme or reason. I just want some contrast here, but I am using that colorless blender again so that I can keep some white areas. So next, going to go ahead and fill in these little, I think they're supposed to be shells, in the inside of the little crystal ball, as well as these little rings and gems. Going to use the C7, C5, C3, and C1 for the highlight color. And you can see that I am just going to leave a teeny tiny bit of an area for that highlight color. And this, again, will change the intensity, even though I use the same exact color combination as I used for the octopus itself. It looks completely different. So I am going to fill in her little eyes there, just because I want them to be really bright and dark with my black marker here. Also, the whites of her eyes, I'm just adding just a little bit of shading with the C3 and C1. So once my coloring was completely done, first I fixed up this little area on the side of her hat. I couldn't get the color to blend the back or to match the background. So I added a couple of different grays, and you can see that I can definitely see that it's a shadow and I don't want it to be a shadow. So I'm going to quickly go over with my colorless blender, and that will blend right into the background. That's the great thing about using regular distress inks, because you can use that colorless blender right over it. So for her little, I think these are called tentacles, maybe. I'm just going to go in with my C1 solid because I want these to be super light. I just don't want them to be completely white. So next, going to add some white gel pen details, and I basically add this to wherever I want. I know somebody asked me what is my method of this. I don't have one really. I try to put these in the darker areas just because I feel like they're going to stand out a little bit more. I also added some dots to some random areas just to get a little bit of texture in the octopus itself. So once the coloring was done, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment directly on the top portion of my card panel with black dye ink by Simon Says Stamp. And then to finish off the card, I am going to add just a few Nuvo drops, and these are the glitter drops, the clear glitter drops. I forget the name, but I'll link it below, as well as some white enamel dots just around that sentiment. And this will kind of look like bubbles, but add a little bit to the background. But that is it. That is the card for today, guys. Thanks a lot for stopping by, and have a great day. Bye.